Masonic Alchemy. Welcome to Masonic Alchemy, an exciting journey in which we will explore the hidden and symbolic connections between two ancient disciplines, alchemy and Freemasonry. Throughout this audiobook, we will delve into the roots, principles and teachings of both systems of knowledge, unraveling the mysteries that have fascinated truth seekers, philosophers and spiritualists around the world for centuries. Audiobook objectives and purpose. The purpose of this audiobook is to offer a clear and deep understanding of alchemy and Freemasonry, revealing how both apparently distinct currents share a common symbolic and philosophical core. The main objectives we aim to achieve are: 1. Explain the fundamentals of alchemy as a science, art and spiritual path. 2. Describe Freemasonry as an initiatory and philosophical society, highlighting its structures, rites and teachings. 3. Explore the symbolic and spiritual intersections between alchemy and Freemasonry, showing how they complement each other in their quest for human perfection. 4. To provide the listener with tools to apply the principles of alchemy and Freemasonry in their own personal and spiritual development. 5. To invite reflection on the mysteries of the universe and human nature, through the symbolic lens of these two traditions. This audiobook is intended for both those who are already familiar with one of these topics, and those who are looking for an introduction to both. By the end of this journey, we hope that you will not only understand the concepts, but also find inspiration in the symbols and teachings for your own life. Relevance of alchemy and Freemasonry. Alchemy is, in essence, a discipline that seeks the transmutation, not only of metals into gold, but of the human being itself, elevating its material nature to a purer spiritual condition. In its practices, there is hidden a profound wisdom about life, death, regeneration, and the cosmos. Throughout history, alchemy has been seen as a bridge between science and mysticism, offering a holistic vision of reality in which the internal transformation of the alchemist is as important as his physical experiments. Freemasonry, on the other hand, is a philosophical and spiritual fraternity that, through its rituals and symbolism, seeks to build the inner temple of each individual. Through symbols such as the square and compass, and teachings inspired by sacred geometry, Freemasonry teaches its members to perfect themselves, working on both their character and their understanding of the universe. It is an order that invites esoteric knowledge, self-discovery, and universal brotherhood. The relevance of both systems, alchemy and Freemasonry, in the modern world lies in their ability to provide a path to personal growth, spiritual transformation and the search for truth in a context that values both the symbolic and the philosophical. In times when quick and superficial answers predominate, these paths invite deep, rich and meaningful exploration. Brief history of the relationship between alchemy and Freemasonry. Although alchemy and Freemasonry appear to have emerged from different contexts, both paths are intrinsically linked through their symbols and esoteric teachings. Alchemy had its heyday in ancient Egypt, Greece and then in the Islamic world, before reaching Europe in the Middle Ages. Freemasonry, for its part, has its origins in the medieval cathedral builders' guilds and evolved into a philosophical order in the 17th and 18th centuries. The relationship between these two disciplines began to be forged especially during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment period, when secret societies and initiatory orders were on the rise. During this time, many prominent alchemists, such as Isaac Newton and Elias Ashmole, were also Freemasons, and vice versa. These men not only engaged in alchemy in their laboratories, but also participated in Masonic lodges, where they found a symbolic context that resonated with the teachings of the great alchemical work. One of the most notable points of connection is the symbolism of the stone. For alchemists, the Philosopher's stone represented the ultimate goal of transmutation, while in Freemasonry, the raw stone is the symbol of the initiate who must be worked to achieve perfection. Both systems teach, through their symbols, that personal work and inner transformation are essential to attain a higher form of knowledge and being. Throughout history, alchemy and Freemasonry have been intertwined, sharing common symbols, rituals, and aspirations. This audiobook will delve into those intersections, revealing how Masonic alchemy remains relevant to those seeking a path of self-discovery and spiritual perfection. Fundamental concepts. Before we delve into the historical and symbolic details that connect alchemy and Freemasonry, it is crucial to understand what these two disciplines essentially are. Although they may seem different at first glance, a deeper analysis reveals the convergence of their principles and the way in which both seek to guide the individual towards a profound transformation, both internal and external. Definition of alchemy. Alchemy is an esoteric and philosophical discipline that originated in ancient times, combining elements of chemistry, metallurgy, medicine, astrology, mysticism, and spirituality. Its central goal was the transmutation of matter, the process by which alchemists attempted to turn common metals, such as lead, into gold. However, this material purpose was only a metaphor for a deeper quest, the spiritual transmutation of the alchemist himself. At its core, alchemy is about the transformation of the imperfect into the perfect, whether on the physical plane, metals, or the spiritual plane, the evolution of the human soul. Alchemists believed that the purification and elevation of matter through alchemical processes such as calcination, dissolution and coagulation reflected the internal process that a human being must go through to reach a state of perfection. Some of the key concepts of alchemy include the great work, Opus Magnum, the alchemical process divided into stages, nigredo, albedo and rubedo, that represents the gradual transformation of the human being, from darkness, ignorance, to enlightenment, wisdom. The Philosopher's Stone, the ultimate symbol of alchemy, representing perfection, wisdom and eternal life, both materially and spiritually. The four elements, earth, air, fire and water, which alchemists consider the fundamental bases of all matter. The three alchemical principles, sulfur, mercury and salt, which symbolize essential aspects of the universe and the human being, the soul, the spirit and the body, respectively. In short, alchemy is not simply a proto-science that sought to create physical gold, but rather a system of thought that encompassed the integral transformation of the human being, guiding him from his most crude and imperfect state towards enlightenment and spiritual perfection. Definition of Freemasonry. Freemasonry is an initiatory and philosophical society, whose origins date back to the builders' guilds of the Middle Ages. However, over time, it evolved from an operative group of stonemasons to a speculative organization that uses building symbols to transmit moral, philosophical and spiritual teachings. At the heart of Freemasonry is the idea that each individual must carve out his own inner temple, honing his character, elevating his spirit, and contributing to the welfare of humanity. To do this, Freemasonry uses a set of symbols and rituals inspired by construction, the best known being the compass, the square, the hammer, and the rough stone. These symbols teach lessons about personal discipline, ethics, and the pursuit of knowledge. Freemasonry is organized into degrees, which represent different stages in the initiate's learning process. Apprentice, the first degree, where the initiate begins to work on his personal transformation, facing his own rough stone. Fellow Mason, in this degree, the Mason refines his understanding of the symbolic principles and tools that will help him build his inner temple. Master, the highest degree within a symbolic lodge, where the Mason achieves a greater understanding of the mysteries of the universe and of his own being. On a philosophical level, Freemasonry teaches universal principles of liberty, equality, fraternity and encourages the search for truth, continuous self-improvement and work for the common good. Freemasonry sees itself as a brotherhood of free and upright men who support each other on this journey towards moral and spiritual perfection. Symbolic connection between alchemy and Freemasonry. Although at first glance alchemy and Freemasonry appear to be separate disciplines, one focused on the transmutation of matter and the other on the symbolic construction of being, when exploring their symbols and principles, deep connections between the two emerge. 1. Personal transformation. In alchemy, the transmutation of lead into gold is a metaphor for the purification and elevation of the soul. In Freemasonry, the transformation of the rough stone into a perfect cubic stone represents the Mason's work on himself. Both traditions use material symbols, metal and stone, to represent the need for the individual to work on his own being, polishing away his imperfections and reaching a higher state of consciousness and morality. 2. The great work in the construction of the temple. Alchemy aims at the great work, a spiritual process of purification and perfection. Freemasonry, on the other hand, uses the construction of Solomon's temple as a metaphor for the inner perfection of the Mason. In both cases, it is about the creation of something perfect and eternal, whether it is the philosopher's stone or the spiritual temple that represents the enlightened man. 3. The elements and symbols of construction. Both alchemy and Freemasonry make use of symbols related to the elements and tools. The 4 alchemical elements, earth, air, fire, and water, have correspondences in Masonic symbols, earth as the foundation of the temple, fire as the purification process, etc. Likewise, the Mason's tools, compass, square, chisel, symbolize the same stages of perfection as the alchemical processes. 4. The path to light. Enlightenment is a central concept in both disciplines. In alchemy, it is represented by the culmination of the great work, the attainment of the philosopher's stone and the entrance to eternal wisdom. In Freemasonry, the search for the light is fundamental, and is associated with the knowledge and truth that the Mason must attain in order to perfect his being. 5. The Master and the Alchemist. In both systems, the figure of the Master is fundamental. The alchemist needs a master to transmit to him the secrets of the great work, just as the Mason needs the Master Mason to guide him on his journey of perfection. In both cases, knowledge is transmitted in an esoteric and gradual manner, through a process of initiation. In short, both alchemy and Freemasonry offer symbolic and spiritual paths to human perfection, using different symbols but with a common purpose, the transformation and elevation of human consciousness, from the gross to the sublime. History of alchemy. Alchemy, as an esoteric and philosophical practice, has a long and rich history, spanning thousands of years and multiple civilizations. Although alchemy is often seen as a precursor to modern chemistry, its true purpose was much deeper. It sought the transformation not only of metals, but of the human being as a whole, through spiritual purification and enlightenment. Throughout history, alchemy has evolved and taken different forms depending on the place and time, always maintaining a symbolic and mystical character that distinguishes it. Alchemy in ancient Egypt and Greece. Alchemy has its earliest documented roots in ancient Egypt, a civilization known for its deep esoteric knowledge and relationship with the divine. The ancient Egyptians practiced what they called chemia, a term that would later give rise to the word alchemy. The meaning of chemia is linked to the Egyptian name for the black, fertile land of the Nile, which symbolized fertility and rebirth, principles that were also reflected in their alchemical practices. One of the most important figures in Egyptian alchemy is the mythical Hermes Trismegistus, a legendary figure who was associated with both the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek god Hermes. Hermes Trismegistus is credited with writing seminal alchemical texts known as the Emerald Tablet, a cryptic text containing the famous adage, "As above, so below," a key teaching describing the correspondence between the heavenly and earthly worlds. Egyptian alchemy was deeply intertwined with religion and the belief in the immortality of the soul, leading to alchemical practices geared not only toward the transformation of metals, but also toward the purification of the soul for the afterlife. Egyptian pharaohs, in their quest for immortality, employed alchemists to help preserve their bodies and spirits, with embalming being a type of alchemical ritual. Greek culture, where it was reinterpreted through the philosophical lens of great thinkers such as Plato and Aristotle. In Greece, alchemy began to take on a more systematic and philosophical approach, centered on the idea that all elements of matter were composed of combinations of the 4 basic elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Aristotle in particular developed the theory of Hyli, which posits that all matter can change form if its underlying raw material is altered, a fundamental concept for alchemists. One of the great achievements of Greek alchemy was its fusion with gnosis, or spiritual knowledge, which expanded the alchemical quest beyond material experiments toward perfection and self-knowledge. Alchemy in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. During the Middle Ages, alchemy flourished, especially in the Islamic world and then in Europe, as Greek and Egyptian knowledge was translated and adapted. In the Islamic world, figures such as Jabir ibn Hayyan, Geber in Latin, laid the foundations of medieval alchemy. Geber is known as the father of Arabic chemistry and is credited with introducing fundamental alchemical concepts, such as the 3 alchemical principles: sulfur, representing the soul; mercury, the spirit; and salt, the body. His work was instrumental in transforming alchemy into a more structured science, combining mysticism with laboratory experimentation. During this period, Islamic alchemy was not only a spiritual quest, but also an advanced experimental practice, where techniques of distillation, calcination and sublimation were perfected, methods that later influenced modern chemistry. When alchemical knowledge reached Europe through Spain and the Crusades, alchemy became a widely studied discipline in Christian monasteries. European alchemists saw the transmutation of metals as a reflection of the spiritual process that Christians had to go through in order to purify their souls and get closer to God. The Renaissance marked a crucial stage in the history of alchemy, when the practice was not only focused on the transformation of metals, but also on the development of the human being. Key figures such as Paracelsus began to reinterpret alchemy as a spiritual medicine, developing the concept that true transmutation was the healing of body and soul. During this period, alchemy was combined with Renaissance humanism and Hermetic studies, leading to a proliferation of alchemical texts written in code, such as those of Nicholas Flamel, who was said to have discovered the secrets of the Philosopher's Stone. Alchemy during the Renaissance not only attracted mystics, but also scientists such as Isaac Newton, who in addition to his advances in physics and mathematics, devoted much of his life to the study of alchemy. Major alchemists in history. Over the centuries, many alchemists have left their mark on history, not only for their contributions to alchemy, but also for their influence on science, philosophy, and spirituality. 1. Hermes Trismegistus, Ancient Egypt. The mythical author of the Emerald Tablet, a seminal alchemical text laying the foundations of esoteric alchemy, which influenced the Egyptians as well as later Greeks and Europeans. Through his figure, belief in the relationship between alchemy and divine knowledge was consolidated. 2. Jabir ibn Hayyan, Jibir, 8th century, Islamic world considered one of the greatest alchemists of all time. Jibir combined mysticism with practical science. He is famous for introducing the 3 alchemical principles and for having developed several chemical processes that are still relevant today. 3. Paracelsus, 1493–1541. A Swiss physician, alchemist, and philosopher, Paracelsus revolutionized the world of medicine and alchemy by proposing that the health of the body depended on its balance with alchemical elements. He believed that alchemy should not focus only on the transmutation of metals, but on the healing of the human body, which led to the development of iatrochemistry. 4. Nicholas Flamel, 1330–1418. A French scribe and alchemist, whose legends suggest that he discovered the secret of the Philosopher's Stone and immortality. Although many of his exploits are likely myths, Flamel is considered an iconic figure in European alchemy and remains a source of fascination in popular culture. 5. Isaac Newton, 1642–1727. Although best known for his work in physics and mathematics, Newton devoted much of his life to alchemy. Through his study of alchemical texts, Newton sought to understand the secrets of creation and matter. He believed that alchemical principles underlay the laws of the universe and that alchemy was a divine science. 6. Elias Ashmole, 1617–1692. An alchemist and founding member of the Royal Society, Ashmole was also one of the first documented Freemasons. His work integrated alchemical knowledge with Masonic symbolism, demonstrating the interconnection between these two esoteric paths. Each of these figures left a lasting legacy on alchemy, contributing to its development not only as an esoteric practice, but also as a field of knowledge that influenced science, philosophy, and spirituality. Alchemy, through the centuries, has remained a symbol of inner transformation and the search for wisdom, uniting the material and the spiritual on a path to perfection. Fundamental principles of alchemy. Alchemy, as an esoteric and philosophical discipline, focuses not only on the transmutation of matter, but also on the process of spiritual and personal transformation. To achieve this transmutation, alchemists developed a set of principles that represented both chemical processes and stages of internal evolution. These principles include the Sol Vitae Coagula, the great work, Opus Magnum, and the interaction between the 4 elements and the 3 alchemical principles. Each of these concepts, in addition to having a symbolic value, contains profound teachings about the alchemist's path to perfection. The Sol Vitae Coagula, Dissolution and Coagulation. The principle of solve et coagula is one of the pillars of alchemy and can be translated as dissolve and coagulate. This principle describes a dual process in which matter, and, symbolically, the human being, must go through stages of dissolution and subsequent recomposition, a cycle that reflects constant transformation and purification. This process is both physical and spiritual. Solve, dissolution. The first stage consists of dissolution or separation. In material terms, it is the act of breaking down a compound into its simplest parts. Symbolically, this process represents the need to destroy or dissolve the negative aspects of the ego and the impurities that hinder spiritual evolution. The individual must let go of his attachments, prejudices and weaknesses, breaking down the raw matter of his inner being. It is a stage of purification, in which the human being faces darkness, nigredo, confusion and doubt. Coagulation. After dissolution comes the stage of coagulation or recomposition, where the separated elements are reunited in a new, higher, purer form. This process is not simply the restoration of what was dissolved, but the creation of something higher, transformed. On the spiritual plane, it means the reconstruction of the being after impurities have been eliminated. Matter or the soul is reorganized into a higher state, free of imperfections. This is the phase in which the alchemist begins to rebuild his inner temple from the purified materials, moving towards perfection. This cycle of dissolution and coagulation is a reflection of the cyclical nature of spiritual transformation, where destruction precedes creation, and chaos is the prelude to a new order. The solve et coagula is not just a chemical formula, but a metaphor for the path of purification and regeneration of the soul, which must be repeated over and over again until perfection is achieved. The great work, Opus Magnum. The great work, either Opus Magnum, is the supreme goal of alchemy, and represents the complete process of transmutation, both on the material and spiritual plane. This process is divided into 3 or 4 symbolic stages, which describe the transformation of the alchemist and of matter towards a state of perfection. Each stage corresponds to a color, which has both a symbolic and an operational meaning. 1. Nigredo, the black work. This is the first stage, known as the black phase or putrefaction. Here, matter, or being, must symbolically die, go through decomposition and face darkness. In spiritual terms, it represents the confrontation with the darkest and most chaotic aspects of being, the ego and imperfections that must be purified. The alchemist must go through this dark night of the soul before he can begin his regeneration process. 2. Albedo, the white work. After putrefaction comes the white phase, where matter is purified and clarified. The human soul, after having been stripped of its impurities in the nigredo stage, begins to be illuminated, reaching a state of clarity and inner peace. Symbolically, it is the beginning of enlightenment or spiritual awakening, where the alchemist reaches a purer state and is more receptive to wisdom. 3. Citronite, the work in yellow. This stage, although not always mentioned in alchemical texts, is considered the phase where the golden light of dawn begins to manifest in the process of transformation. It is the intermediate step between purification and perfection. In spiritual terms, it symbolizes the awakening of consciousness and the entry into a state closer to divinity. 4. Rubedo, the work in red. Finally, the last stage is the red phase, where matter has reached its maximum perfection. This is the phase of complete enlightenment and rebirth, represented by the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, symbol of total perfection, immortality and absolute knowledge. In spiritual terms, Rubedo is the state in which the alchemist has managed to unite with the divine, completing the cycle of purification and transformation. The great work is therefore both a material process, the transmutation of lead into gold, and a spiritual one, the transmutation of the soul towards perfection. Each stage of the alchemical process is deeply linked to the internal work that the alchemist must do on himself, with the ultimate goal of attaining spiritual perfection and divine wisdom. The 4 elements and the 3 alchemical principles. One of the central concepts in alchemy is the interaction between the 4 fundamental elements and the 3 alchemical principles. These represent the basis of both matter and the human being, and their balance is essential for the success of the great work. The 4 elements. In alchemy, Everything in the universe is considered to be composed of combinations of the four basic elements. 1. Earth symbolizes stability, solidity, and the tangible. In humans, it represents the physical body and its basic needs. In alchemy, earth is the element that must be purified and elevated. 2. Water represents fluidity, change and emotions. In humans, it is associated with feelings and intuition. Water is essential for the processes of dissolution and purification in alchemy. 3. Air symbolizes movement, intellect, and communication. In humans, it is linked to the mind and thought. Air allows for the volatilization and expansion of consciousness in alchemy. 4. Fire represents transformation, energy, and purification. In humans, it is related to will and spirit. Fire is the element that triggers alchemical changes and allows transmutation. These elements are not only physical forces, but also spiritual archetypes that must be balanced for the alchemical process to be completed successfully. The 3 alchemical principles. In addition to the 4 elements, alchemists also recognize the existence of 3 fundamental principles that act as the underlying forces behind all matter. 1. Sulfur symbolizes the soul and the principle of combustion and transformation. It is the active, hot and dry principle that represents will and spiritual energy. Sulfur is the inner fire that drives transmutation. 2. Mercury represents the spirit, fluidity and volatility. It is the passive, cold and humid principle, which acts as a mediator between the body and the soul. Mercury is the agent that facilitates transformation and allows the union of the other 2 principles. 3. Salt symbolizes the body, the fixed substance and crystallization. It is the solid principle, representing materialization and the most tangible aspect of existence. Salt is the final product of the alchemical process, the purified body that has been transmuted. These 3 principles represent the different aspects of creation and the human being, the body, the soul and the spirit, which must be balanced and harmonized through the great work. In summary, the fundamental principles of alchemy offer a complex and symbolic vision of transformation, both material and spiritual. The Salve Coagula describes the necessary cycle of dissolution and regeneration. The great work represents the path to perfection, divided into stages that reflect the inner growth of the alchemist, and the 4 elements and 3 alchemical principles provide the underlying structure of the entire process. These principles are not merely abstract theories, but constitute a spiritual path that guides the alchemist in his quest for wisdom and transcendence. The symbolism of the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is one of the most enigmatic and powerful symbols of alchemy, representing both the ultimate goal of material transmutation and the attainment of spiritual perfection. Throughout history, it has been seen as the object of a tireless quest by alchemists, who wish to transform common metals into gold and achieve spiritual immortality. However, the true meaning of the Philosopher's Stone transcends the material and esoteric sphere, being a metaphor for the inner transformation of the human being towards a state of enlightenment and perfection. The search for material and spiritual perfection. The Philosopher's Stone has traditionally been described as a mystical substance capable of converting base metals, such as lead, into pure gold, the ultimate transmutation in the material realm. This alchemical gold is not just the precious metal itself, but a symbol of the attainment of perfection and the culmination of alchemical work. From a material perspective, the Philosopher's Stone is seen as the answer to the alchemist's longing to master the laws of nature and overcome the limitations of the physical world. In this sense, the quest for the Philosopher's Stone reflected a desire to achieve total control over matter. But the true perfection that the alchemists sought was not limited to the material realm. In its deepest sense, the Philosopher's Stone represents spiritual perfection and union with the divine. In this context, the transmutation of lead into gold is a metaphor for the purification of the human soul, where impurities, symbolized by lead, must be removed in order to reach a state of spiritual purity, symbolized by gold. The stone, then, is a symbol of the immortality of the soul, supreme wisdom, and access to divine knowledge. For alchemists, this quest was seen as a path to perfection of both matter and spirit, a process in which both aspects were intertwined. Thus, the Philosopher's Stone was not just an external object that could be manufactured in a laboratory, but represented an inner state that had to be achieved through discipline, meditation and personal purification. Inner transformation and transcendence. The search for the Philosopher's Stone is not just an external quest, but involves a profound inner transformation. The alchemists understood that the Philosopher's Stone could not be created if a transformation was not first achieved within the alchemist himself. This process of internal transformation is known as the Great Work, a symbolic journey in which the soul goes through various stages of purification and regeneration. The alchemical journey towards the creation of the Philosopher's Stone can be seen as a process of transcendence, in which the alchemist must shed the impurities of the ego, overcome the limitations of his lower self, and rise to a higher level of consciousness. The Philosopher's Stone, in this sense, is the result of a process of total purification involving the symbolic death of the lower and corrupt aspects of the self, represented in the Nigredo stage, and the resurrection of the individual into a state of enlightenment and wisdom, Rubido. This process of inner transformation is essentially a search for truth, both in the physical and spiritual world. The alchemist, through his work in the laboratory and his inner search, seeks to discover the secrets of the universe and to understand its relationship with the divine. Thus, the Philosopher's Stone becomes a symbol of the unity between the human being and the divine, a state of enlightenment in which the individual has transcended the limitations of his mortal nature and has reached a state of spiritual immortality. Transcendence, in the alchemical context, is the realization of the ultimate truth, that the microcosm, the human being, is intrinsically connected to the macrocosm, the universe, and that the process of transmutation occurs not only in metals, but also in the human soul. The Philosopher's Stone symbolizes the culmination of this connection and the achievement of a state of perfect harmony between the material and the spiritual. The Philosopher's Stone as a universal symbol. Through its symbolism, the Philosopher's Stone has transcended the boundaries of alchemy and has become a universal symbol of the quest for perfection and spiritual realization. In various esoteric and religious traditions, the search for a higher state of consciousness and union with the divine is represented in different ways, but the essence of this quest is always the same, a journey towards ultimate truth and transcendence of being. The Philosopher's Stone, then, is not simply a mythical object or an unattainable goal, but a metaphor for the spiritual evolution that every human being can undertake. Ultimately, it represents the latent potential in each individual to transform and transcend, reaching a state of unity with the cosmos and with the divine. In short, the symbolism of the Philosopher's Stone encompasses both the longing for material perfection and the quest for spiritual perfection. Beyond its physical character, the Philosopher's Stone is a representation of the inner transformation that the human being must undergo in order to achieve enlightenment and transcendence. In this sense, the Philosopher's Stone is a guide to the alchemical journey, a reminder that true transmutation does not occur in matter alone, but in the soul of the alchemist. Alchemy as a spiritual metaphor. Alchemy, beyond its experimental practices in the laboratory, has always been considered a spiritual metaphor for the process of internal transformation of the human being. Through the symbolism of the transmutation of metals, the creation of the Philosopher's Stone and the manipulation of the elements, alchemists express their understanding of the purification of the soul and the path to enlightenment. In this context, alchemy is an esoteric discipline that offers a symbolic representation of how the individual can reach a state of spiritual perfection through the purification of his inner being. Purification of the soul. In the alchemical tradition, the idea of the purification of the soul is central. Alchemists saw the transformation of base metals into gold as a metaphor for the process necessary for a human being to elevate his soul from a corrupt and earthly state to a pure and divine condition. This purification process was described through a series of symbolic operations involving the dissolution, separation, purification and recomposition of the elements of the soul, reflecting the physical operations that occurred in the alchemical laboratory. One of the key principles in alchemy is the process of solviti coagula, dissolving and coagulating, which also has a deep spiritual meaning. On the soul level, this process describes how the individual must first dissolve the impure elements of his being, detachments, material desires, the ego, and then coagulate, that is, rebuild himself in a higher, purer state. This stage of dissolution is comparable to a kind of symbolic death or dark night of the soul, in which the individual faces his own darkness, his imperfections and limitations. Purification of the soul involves a process of death and rebirth. In alchemical terms, the human soul must pass through the stage of nigredo, the black work, a phase of decomposition and putrefaction, in which the being is stripped of all its impurities and defects. It is in this stage of suffering and darkness that the soul begins to free itself from the lower aspects of its nature. After this symbolic death, the soul is reborn, purer and more luminous, in the stage of albedo, the white work, to then reach perfection in rubedo, the red work. This purification cycle is essentially a process of spiritual awakening in which the individual prepares to achieve enlightenment. Alchemy teaches that only through confrontation with oneself, acceptance and overcoming of weaknesses, can one reach a state of perfection. Purification of the soul is the first necessary step to achieve complete transformation, union with the divine and access to spiritual wisdom. The path to enlightenment. Alchemy, as a spiritual metaphor, offers a symbolic guide to the path to enlightenment. This path is a gradual process involving self-knowledge, purification of defects, and the cultivation of wisdom and virtue. As in the process of transmutation of matter, the spiritual path of the alchemist follows a series of stages that lead from the state of imperfection to enlightenment and union with the divine. 1. Nigredo, darkness and purification. The first step on the path to enlightenment is the recognition of inner imperfections. This is a stage of confrontation with the ego, material desires, and uncontrolled passions. It is the phase in which the soul is dissolved, stripped of everything that prevents it from evolving. Symbolically, it is a kind of spiritual death, an experience of crisis and chaos that the alchemist must face before being able to advance. This stage is crucial, since it is in it that the true spiritual nature of the individual begins to be released. 2. Albedo, clarity and awakening. After the initial purification, the soul enters the stage of initial enlightenment. In this phase, the individual begins to see clearly, and the spirit rises above the material world. It is a stage of spiritual awakening, where the alchemist attunes himself to the inner light of wisdom. Here, the soul has already been purified of much of its impurities and is ready to receive a greater understanding of the universe and its place in it. 3. Rubedo, enlightenment and perfection. The final stage of the spiritual path is the culmination of the alchemical process, where the alchemist has achieved total perfection and complete enlightenment. Symbolized by the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, this stage represents the union of the human being with the divine, the fusion between the microcosm, the human soul, and the macrocosm, the universe. At this point, the alchemist has not only understood the truth of the universe, but has also transformed his being into one with divine wisdom. The path to enlightenment in alchemy is also a path of self-mastery. Through knowledge of the secrets of nature, the alchemist learns to master not only the material world, but also his own inner nature. Alchemy teaches that enlightenment is not a state that is achieved instantly or magically, but is the result of constant and deep work on oneself. Spiritual gold, the ultimate goal. Although material alchemy seeks the transmutation of common metals into gold, this gold is only a reflection of the true alchemical goal, spiritual gold. This spiritual gold represents wisdom, moral perfection, and the divine state to which the human being aspires on his path to enlightenment. Upon reaching the state of gold, the alchemist's soul becomes incorruptible, immortal, and in harmony with the laws of the universe. The alchemical process is therefore a metaphor for the process of self-realization and transcendence. The alchemist who follows this path not only transforms matter, but transforms his own being. The gold he seeks is not merely physical, but a symbol of the highest spiritual state that a human being can attain. In short, alchemy as a spiritual metaphor reflects the deep inner work necessary for the purification of the soul and the path to enlightenment. Alchemical processes, such as the solviti coagula and the stages of the great work, symbolically describe the journey of the human being from his initial state of imperfection to complete spiritual realization. The alchemist, by transforming matter into gold, reflects the inner transformation of the human being who seeks to transcend his limitations and unite with divine wisdom. Historical origins of Freemasonry. Freemasonry is one of the oldest and most enigmatic fraternities in the world, with a history dating back to medieval times and whose development has been closely linked both to the operational practices of the Builders' Guilds and to the philosophical evolution that transformed the organization into a speculative society dedicated to moral and spiritual reflection. To understand the nature of modern Freemasonry, it is necessary to explore its historical origins, which lie in the medieval Builders' Guilds and its subsequent transition into a philosophical order. Roots in the medieval Builders' Guilds. The origin of Freemasonry is commonly associated with the guilds of stonemasons and builders that flourished in medieval Europe. These guilds of operative masons, stone builders, were highly specialized groups responsible for erecting cathedrals, castles, and other great buildings of the time. Mastery of the art of construction required not only advanced technical skills, but also a deep knowledge of mathematics, geometry, and architecture. These guilds were, in essence, closed societies that jealously guarded their technical know-how and professional secrets, passed on only among their members. Operative masons were organized into lodges, meeting spaces, where they taught, practiced, and passed on their building techniques through apprenticeship systems that distinguished members according to their skill level. They were structured into hierarchies that included apprentices, fellows, and masters, a system that would later become a key organizational model in speculative masonry. In addition to the practical aspects of construction, medieval guilds also developed a symbolic system based on the tools they used, such as the compass, square and level, which over time took on moral and spiritual significance. These symbols would later be adopted and reinterpreted in speculative Freemasonry. Another important feature of the guilds was their system of initiation rites and ceremonies. These rituals were intended to distinguish the members of the guild, to guarantee loyalty and mutual respect, and to ensure that the secrets of the trade remained within the organization. These initiation rites were also integrated into speculative Freemasonry, where they took on a philosophical and esoteric character. The evolution towards a philosophical order. As the early modern period progressed, the structure of medieval builders' guilds began to decline due to a number of factors, including changing construction methods and the emergence of new forms of labor organization. However, Masonic lodges did not disappear. Instead, they began to evolve into something more abstract and speculative. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries, people outside the building trade, such as thinkers, scientists, nobles and bourgeois, began to join Masonic lodges. This change was essential to the transition from operative masonry to speculative masonry, that is, from a fraternity of craftsmen to a philosophical society. In this new stage, the tools and symbols of construction, the square, the compass, the rough stone and the polished stone, ceased to have a merely technical purpose and acquired a symbolic and moral meaning. The rough stone, for example, became a metaphor for the human being in his natural state, which had to be perfected through knowledge and virtue, like a stonemason who carves the stone until it becomes a perfect piece. Thus, speculative masonry adopted a philosophical approach that sought the personal improvement and spiritual development of its members. Throughout the 17th and early 18th centuries, this shift took hold. Lodges began to focus on philosophical and ethical principles, inspired by the Enlightenment and ancient esoteric knowledge. Speculative masonry was organized around concepts of liberty, equality, fraternity, and the pursuit of truth, using the symbolism of building as a metaphor for the construction of human character and society. Masons were no longer builders of buildings, but builders of ideals, who saw their work as the building of an inner temple based on wisdom, strength, and beauty. This change culminated in the founding of the Grand Lodge of London in 1717, an event that officially marks the birth of modern Freemasonry. Since then, Freemasonry has evolved as a philosophical and fraternal order, influenced by esoteric and humanistic traditions, while maintaining the organizational and symbolic structure it inherited from the Builders' Guilds. The historical origins of Freemasonry lie in the medieval guilds of builders, whose technical and symbolic legacy was the basis for the evolution towards a philosophical and spiritual society. Although it emerged from an operational environment focused on the construction of large buildings, Freemasonry transformed itself into a speculative order dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, moral perfection, and spiritual improvement. Structure of Freemasonry. Freemasonry is organized through a complex, hierarchical structure, combining degrees of knowledge, symbols, and rituals that guide the moral and spiritual development of its members. The Masonic structure follows a system of degrees that reflect the progress of the initiate within the order, from the most basic level to the most advanced. These degrees not only imply a higher level of knowledge, but also a deeper commitment to Masonic values and principles. In addition, lodges and rites are fundamental components in the organization of Freemasonry, offering a framework in which Masons can meet, work, and follow traditional rituals. This hierarchical structure is steeped in symbolism, reflecting both the historical heritage of Freemasonry and its continuing quest for wisdom and perfection. The Masonic degrees: Apprentice, Fellow, and Master. Freemasonry is organized into three main degrees, which represent a Mason's journey from initiation to mastery within the order. These degrees form part of the system known as Symbolic or Blue Lodge Masonry, and are the foundations upon which the entire Masonic system is built. 1. Apprentice. The first degree is that of Apprentice. This degree represents the entrance into the order and the beginning of the learning process. The apprentice is symbolized as a rough stone that must be worked and polished through knowledge and virtue. At this level, the new member becomes familiar with the basic principles of Freemasonry, such as the importance of inner work, moral discipline, and respect for Masonic symbols and rituals. The apprentice is in the initial phase of his development, in which he must strive to overcome his passions and defects, and begin to understand the fundamental values of the fraternity: truth, justice, and brotherhood. 2. Fellowship. The second degree is that of Fellowship, which symbolizes progress and transition to greater understanding and knowledge within Freemasonry. In this degree, the Mason is seen as a partly polished stone, indicating that he has begun to perfect himself on both an intellectual and moral level. The Fellowship studies more deeply the secrets of Freemasonry, particularly those relating to geometry, architecture, and the universal principles of creation. This degree symbolizes the development of intellectual faculties and commitment to the search for truth. In operative symbolism, the Fellowship is the builder at work, perfecting his craft and advancing in the art of construction, both material and spiritual. 3. Master. The third and final degree of Symbolic Freemasonry is that of Master, which represents the culmination of the Masonic journey. At this degree, the Mason is seen as a perfectly polished stone, indicating that he has attained an advanced level of self-knowledge and wisdom. The Master Mason has understood the deepest mysteries of the fraternity and has fully integrated the values of Freemasonry into his life. This degree is associated with the legend of the Master Architect Hiram Abiff, who symbolizes sacrifice, integrity, and the immortality of the soul. The Master degree also marks the beginning of the Mason's ability to lead and guide others within the fraternity. Each of these degrees is accompanied by specific initiation rituals, which include oaths, symbolic teachings, and the gradual revelation of Masonic secrets. The degrees reflect the spiritual and moral progress of the Mason, and his advancement depends on his commitment to Masonic principles. Masonic lodges and rites. Lodges are the basic organizational units of Freemasonry. A lodge is a place where Masons meet to perform their rituals, share knowledge, and work on the moral and spiritual development of their members. Each lodge is made up of a group of Masons belonging to the different degrees of the order, and each meeting follows a specific ritual structure. At these meetings, Masons perform ceremonies that vary according to the degree of the initiate and the Masonic rite they follow. There are several Masonic rites in which the practice of Freemasonry is organized in different regions of the world. Although all rites share the three basic symbolic degrees, they may differ in the way they are taught and in the specific rituals that are carried out. The two best-known rites are: 1. Ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. This is one of the most widely accepted rites and has a total of 33 degrees. In addition to the initial three symbolic degrees, the Scottish Rite introduces higher degrees that explore more deeply the esoteric and philosophical mysteries of Freemasonry. These additional degrees are considered an advancement in the Mason's knowledge and responsibility within the fraternity. 2. York Rite. This rite is particularly common in England and the United States. It also has several additional degrees, although it is more focused on chivalry and Christian themes, and its advanced degrees include orders such as the Knights Templar and the Royal Arch. Each lodge is governed by a worshipful master, who is the elected leader of the group. This master mason is responsible for conducting ceremonies, organizing meetings, and looking after the welfare of the members. The hierarchical structure of the lodges also includes officers such as the senior and junior wardens, the secretary, and the treasurer, all with specific responsibilities within the lodge. Hierarchy and symbolism in Freemasonry. The Masonic hierarchy is based on a principle of progress through knowledge and virtue. As a Mason advances through the degrees, he gains greater responsibility within the lodge and more access to the esoteric secrets of the order. However, this hierarchy is not merely external, it reflects the inner journey of personal improvement. Advancement in Masonry is based on merit, learning, and commitment to Masonic ideals. Symbolism is central to Freemasonry and is present in every aspect of the organization, from rituals to lodge architecture. The builder's tools, such as the square, compass, level, and chisel, are symbols that represent moral and spiritual principles. For example, the square represents rectitude and honesty in actions, while the compass symbolizes the limits that the Mason must impose on his desires and ambitions. Other fundamental symbols include the rough stone and the polished stone, which represent the condition of the human being in his natural state and the ideal of perfection that he must attain through knowledge and virtue. The lodge itself is seen as a symbolic temple, a replica of the Temple of Solomon, which Masons build through their moral and spiritual work. The structure of Freemasonry reflects a profound system of learning and personal transformation. From the degrees of apprentice, fellowship, and master to the organization and lodges in Masonic rites, Freemasonry is designed to guide its members on a journey of self-knowledge and spiritual perfection. Through its hierarchy, symbols, and rituals, Freemasonry offers a path to personal growth and the search for truth, using the ancient art of building as a metaphor for the construction of an inner temple based on the highest moral and spiritual ideals. Philosophical and ethical principles of Freemasonry. Freemasonry is much more than a fraternity, it is a philosophical school whose main objective is the improvement of the human being through moral, ethical, and spiritual principles. Since its creation as a speculative order, Freemasonry has promoted a set of universal values that guide the conduct of its members and seek to foster the construction of a more just and equitable society. Among these values, freedom, equality, and fraternity stand out, which serve as pillars of its ethics. In addition, the constant search for knowledge and wisdom, together with the use of symbolism to represent personal and moral development, make Freemasonry a path of self-exploration and continuous improvement. Liberty, equality, fraternity. These three principles are the fundamental foundations on which Masonic ethics are based. Liberty, equality, and fraternity are not only political or social ideals, but have a deeper meaning within the Masonic context, representing universal spiritual and philosophical values. 1. Freedom. In Freemasonry, freedom refers not only to the absence of external oppression, but also to internal liberation. Freedom is the ability to think, believe, and act autonomously, without dogmatic impositions or coercion. For a Freemason, being free implies exercising discernment and reason, making ethical decisions based on universal moral principles. Freedom is also linked to the responsibility to act righteously and to actively contribute to the well-being of the community and humanity as a whole. 2. Equality. Equality in Freemasonry is based on the recognition that all human beings share the same intrinsic dignity. Within the lodge, all Masons, regardless of degree, race, religion, or social status, are considered equal. This principle fosters an atmosphere of mutual respect, in which external differences disappear and all meet on a common plane as beings in search of the truth. Equality also implies that each Mason has the same opportunities to grow and progress on his moral and spiritual path. 3. Fraternity. Masonic fraternity is the bond that unites all members of the order in a universal brotherhood. This principle of fraternity is not limited to the members of the lodge, but extends to all mankind. For Masons, fraternity means solidarity, mutual support, and the understanding that the well-being of each is connected to the well-being of others. Masonic fraternity seeks to transcend divisions between people and work for the common good. The triad of liberty, equality, and fraternity has deep philosophical roots in Freemasonry and is reflected in its internal structure, its rites, and its global mission to promote a more enlightened, just, and supportive humanity. Quest for knowledge and wisdom. One of the fundamental aspects of Freemasonry is the pursuit of knowledge. Masons see themselves as seekers of truth and consider knowledge to be the key to personal and social improvement. However, this quest is not limited to intellectual or scientific knowledge, it also encompasses self-knowledge and the development of inner wisdom. Wisdom involves not just acquiring information or technical skills, but learning to apply that knowledge in daily life to act with justice, compassion, and discernment. Wisdom is acquired through study, reflection, and experience, and is seen as a continuous process of learning and improvement. Freemasonry sees esoteric knowledge as a path to understanding the universal laws that govern the world and the human soul. Masons study not only philosophical texts, but also the hidden symbolism in builders' tools, the teachings of religions, and the mysteries of ancient sciences. All of this is part of a search for truth that extends beyond the visible and the immediate, toward the spiritual and the transcendental. For Masons, knowledge is a tool for inner transformation. As the Mason advances in his understanding, he is expected to become wiser, more humble, and more aware of his place in the universe. This journey toward wisdom parallels the rituals and degrees of Masonry, each of which reveals a new aspect of occult knowledge. The symbolism of the rough stone and the cubic stone. The use of symbolism is a distinctive feature of Freemasonry. Among the most important symbols are the rough stone and the cubic stone, which represent the stages of the Mason's personal and spiritual development. 1. The rough stone. The rough stone symbolizes the Mason in his initial state, before he has begun the process of perfection. It is a shapeless, rough, and unpolished stone, which represents the imperfections and defects of human nature, such as ignorance, selfishness, and lack of self-control. For a Mason, the rough stone is a reminder that the work of improvement and perfection is a personal task that must be undertaken with effort and dedication. The Mason must polish his own rough stone, removing the rough edges of his character through study, meditation, and the application of moral principles. 2. The cubic stone. As the Mason progresses on his path, the rough stone is transformed into a cubic stone, symbolizing moral and spiritual perfection. The cubic stone is smooth and perfectly shaped, indicating that the Mason has attained a level of knowledge and virtue that makes him fit to contribute to the building of the inner temple, a metaphor for the perfection of the soul and the creation of an ideal society. The cubic stone is the ideal to which every Mason aspires, to be a person of moral rectitude, with a firm and balanced character, ready to assist in the great work of humanity. The process of transformation from the rough stone into the cubic stone symbolizes the journey that each Mason must undertake to perfect his nature, moving from a state of imperfection and chaos to a state of balance, wisdom, and harmony. This symbolism resonates with the Masonic values of inner work, self-improvement, and commitment to the common good. The philosophical and ethical principles of Freemasonry are deeply rooted in liberty, equality, and fraternity, universal values that guide the conduct of Masons and promote a more just and supportive world. The search for knowledge and wisdom is central to Masonic life, not only as an intellectual goal, but as a path to inner transformation. Through symbols such as the rough stone and the cubic stone, Freemasonry teaches that moral and spiritual improvement is a work in progress, which must be carried out with dedication and effort, always with the aim of contributing to the well-being of humanity and the construction of a more enlightened and virtuous society. The Philosopher's Stone and the Cubic Stone. In esoteric and philosophical symbolism, both the Philosopher's Stone of Alchemy and the Cubic Stone of Freemasonry represent the ideal of perfection, achieved through personal work and inner transformation. Although these two symbols come from different traditions, they both share the same purpose, to illustrate the process of human evolution from an initial state of imperfection to a state of material and spiritual perfection. The Philosopher's Stone is one of the central symbols of alchemy, and according to legends, is capable of transforming base metals into gold and granting spiritual immortality. This stone is the ultimate representation of the Opus Magnum, or the Great Work, symbolizing the quest for spiritual perfection. In Freemasonry, the cubic stone is the emblem of the Mason who has achieved a high level of moral and spiritual perfection, having worked hard to polish his nature until he has achieved a perfect balance. Both symbols emphasize that perfection is not a given, but is achieved through discipline, conscious effort, and commitment to the process of self-transformation. Perfection through personal work. In both alchemy and Freemasonry, perfection is achieved through a process of intense and continuous personal work. This work is not merely physical or external, but primarily internal. 1. In alchemy, personal work is described as the alchemical process involving several symbolic stages: dissolution, solve, coagulation, coagula, and purification. This process is parallel to the purification of the human being, where the impurities of the soul and ego are eliminated through discipline, meditation and knowledge, until the person becomes his true self, enlightened and perfect. The final result is the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, which represents the union of the spiritual and the material in absolute perfection. 2. In Freemasonry, personal work is symbolized by the act of polishing the rough stone. When an apprentice mason begins his path, he is like a rough, coarse, shapeless stone, symbolizing human nature in its most basic and undeveloped state. Through study, self-reflection, and the practice of Masonic moral principles, the mason works to eliminate his imperfections, smooth out his flaws, and mold his character. Over time, this rough stone becomes a cubic stone, perfectly cut and ready to be used in the symbolic construction of the Masonic temple, which represents the ideal of perfection in life. In both cases, the message is clear: perfection is not a gift, but the fruit of a conscious, constant and disciplined effort. Personal work requires overcoming one's own limitations, weaknesses and mistakes, and is guided by the ideal of becoming a better version of oneself, both materially and spiritually. Inner transformation, from imperfect to perfect. The concept of inner transformation is essential to both alchemy and Freemasonry. In these traditions, transformation does not refer merely to an external or superficial change, but to a profound internal metamorphosis that takes the individual from a state of imperfection and ignorance to a state of perfection, wisdom and balance. 1. The Philosopher's Stone and Alchemy. In alchemy, the process of inner transformation parallels the alchemical process of transmutation of metals. Just as alchemists sought to transform lead into gold, human beings must transform their lower or material aspects into higher spiritual qualities. This includes transmuting ignorance into wisdom, confusion into clarity, and selfishness into compassion. The Philosopher's Stone is the symbol of this perfection achieved through alchemical work, both on the physical and spiritual planes. It represents the unification of opposites, masculine and feminine, spiritual and material, and the attainment of spiritual enlightenment. 2. The cubic stone and Freemasonry. In Freemasonry, the process of transformation is reflected in the passage from a rough stone to a cubic stone. The rough stone represents the human being in his natural state, full of imperfections and limitations. Through Masonic practice and personal effort, this stone is polished and worked until it reaches the form of a cubic stone, a symbol of moral and spiritual perfection. The cubic stone is stable, balanced and ready to be placed in the inner temple, which symbolizes the ideal state to which the Mason aspires. The process of inner transformation is based on the idea that all human beings have within themselves the potential to achieve perfection, but this potential must be activated through work and discipline. In both alchemy and Freemasonry, the transformation from imperfection to perfection is a metaphor for the individual's spiritual journey towards self-knowledge, wisdom and union with the divine. The Philosopher's Stone and the cubic stone are powerful symbols that represent the same ideal of perfection achieved through personal work and inner transformation. Alchemy, with its search for the Philosopher's Stone, and Freemasonry, with its emphasis on polishing the rough stone into a cubic stone, teach us that the human being is an imperfect being by nature, but that he has the capacity to transform himself and rise towards perfection through knowledge, wisdom and moral effort. Both symbols invite us to commit ourselves to a constant process of personal and spiritual improvement, in search of transcendence and inner balance. The inner temple, the construction of the being. The notion of the inner temple is a central symbol in both alchemy and Freemasonry, and refers to the spiritual and moral construction that each individual must undertake within himself. In Freemasonry, this construction is related to the symbolism of the Temple of Solomon, which represents the body, mind, and soul of the human being. In alchemy, the process of building up the self is represented by the internal transformation that leads to perfection and enlightenment. Both the alchemist and the Freemason are seen as builders of their own temple, whose goal is to reach a state of harmony, balance, and spiritual transcendence. Solomon's temple as a symbol of body and soul. In Freemasonry, the Temple of Solomon is a symbol of utmost importance. In the biblical tradition, the Temple of Solomon was built as the dwelling place of God, a sacred space where the divine presence was found. In the Masonic context, this temple is a metaphor for the human being, in which each Mason is the architect in charge of building his own inner temple, that is, his body, mind and spirit. 1. The body as a temple. The Temple of Solomon in Freemasonry symbolizes the physical body, which must be treated with respect and discipline, as it is the temple in which the soul resides. This view is linked to the idea that the body is a physical manifestation of divine perfection, and that it must be cared for and refined through a virtuous and healthy lifestyle. The body is the first step in the construction of the inner temple, because it is through the body that the individual relates to the material world and begins his path to perfection. 2. The soul and spirit as temples. On a symbolic level, Solomon's temple also represents the mind and soul of the individual. Just as the temple was built with precision and in perfect harmony, the Mason seeks to build a balanced mind and a pure soul, eliminating vices and developing the virtues necessary to achieve perfection. This building process includes personal work on morality, ethics, and knowledge, creating a connection between the material, the body, and the spiritual, the soul. The temple, therefore, is a representation of the union of the physical and spiritual worlds in the life of the Mason. The process of building the inner temple, like that of Solomon's temple, is neither easy nor immediate. It involves a continuous work of improvement, reflection and growth, in which each step, each stone placed in its place, represents an achievement or virtue acquired on the path to wisdom and enlightenment. The alchemist and the Mason as builders of their own temple. Both the alchemist and the Mason are considered builders in the symbolic sense. In both traditions, the building of the temple is not external, but internal, and refers to the process of personal transformation that leads the individual to reach his full potential. This construction is a spiritual and moral process, where personal work is the central axis to reach the ideal state of perfection. 1. The alchemist. In the alchemical tradition, the alchemist seeks the transformation of raw matter into something higher, usually symbolized by the transmutation of lead into gold. However, the true purpose of alchemy is the inner development of the alchemist himself. The alchemical work becomes a mirror of the inner work, in which the alchemist transfers the process of transformation of material elements into his own soul. The alchemist, like the Mason, is building his own inner temple, removing impurities from the soul and cultivating wisdom and enlightenment. The alchemical work is a reflection of the journey towards self-knowledge and spiritual transcendence. The process of inner alchemy is seen as the construction of an inner space where the human being can dwell in harmony with himself and with the universe. It is a process of purification and refinement of the I, where each alchemical stage corresponds to a phase of the alchemist's spiritual transformation, from the calcination phase, where the ego is stripped away, to the final coagulation phase, where the being becomes whole and enlightened. 2. The Mason. For the Mason, the act of building his inner temple is fundamentally a work of moral perfection. Masons use the symbolism of building tools, such as the compass, square, and chisel, to represent the virtues they are to cultivate. Just as the chisel is used to shape the rough stone, the Mason uses discipline and knowledge to hone his character and reach a state of perfection. The rough stone, symbolizing the Mason in his natural, unrefined state, is worked into a cubic stone, representing the Mason in his perfected state, ready to be part of the great work of the spiritual temple. In this sense, the Mason sees himself as a builder who, through personal effort, molds and perfects his character and soul. The temple he builds is not an external building, but the temple of his being, a representation of continuous moral and spiritual development. The concept of the inner temple is a symbol shared by alchemy and Freemasonry, and refers to the personal and spiritual work necessary to achieve perfection. The Temple of Solomon and Freemasonry symbolizes the body, mind and soul of the human being, which must be built with discipline and virtues, while the alchemist embarks on a similar process of inner transformation, where his soul is perfected through the great work. Both the alchemist and the Freemason are builders of their own temple, and both use symbolic work as a tool to refine their nature and reach a state of harmony and transcendence. The Secret Master and the Enlightened Alchemist. In Freemasonry and alchemy, the figure of the master is of vital importance. Both the Secret Master in the Masonic tradition and the Illuminated Alchemist in alchemy represent key figures on the path of wisdom and self-knowledge. These masters are not only spiritual guides and guardians of the mysteries, but also living examples of what initiates can become. The symbolism of learning and the transmission of hidden knowledge is central to both traditions, where knowledge is shared gradually, ensuring that the disciple is ready to receive the deeper teachings. The figure of the teacher as a guide on both paths. In both traditions, the teacher is not simply an instructor who imparts academic or practical knowledge. The teacher is a spiritual guide and role model for the disciple, marking the path to be followed in order to achieve enlightenment and moral and spiritual perfection. 1. The Secret Master in Freemasonry. In Freemasonry, the title of Secret Master refers to a degree within the Masonic rites, especially in the ancient and accepted Scottish rite. The Secret Master represents an initiate who has advanced beyond the basic degrees of apprentice and fellow, and who has acquired access to deeper and more reserved knowledge. The figure of the Secret Master symbolizes the guardian of hidden mysteries, who has been able to transcend the limitations of profane wisdom to reach an esoteric understanding of Masonic symbols and teachings. The Secret Master is also a guide to the Masons who come after him, helping the initiates to understand the mysteries of the construction of the inner temple. In this sense, his role is not only to transmit theoretical knowledge, but also to serve as an example of virtue, righteousness, and wisdom in action. The wisdom of the Secret Master is based on personal experience, on the inner work he has done to reach a state of moral and spiritual perfection. 2. The Enlightened Alchemist. In the alchemical tradition, the enlightened alchemist is one who has completed the great work and has reached a high level of spiritual understanding and inner transformation. This master has achieved the symbolic transmutation of the lead of his lower self into the gold of his spiritual self. The alchemist's enlightenment does not refer solely to the mastery of alchemical techniques, but to the attainment of a state of unity with the divine, where the process of purification of the soul has been completed. The enlightened alchemist is also a mentor who helps others to embark on the path of spiritual transmutation. As in Freemasonry, alchemical knowledge is transmitted gradually and veiled, ensuring that the disciple is prepared to understand the deepest mysteries. This master does not only teach formulas or chemical procedures, but also guides the disciple through the internal processes of purification and transformation. The enlightened alchemist is therefore a symbol of what the apprentice can become if he follows with discipline and devotion the arduous path of inner alchemy. The symbolism of learning and the transmission of hidden knowledge. Learning and the transmission of occult knowledge are recurring themes in both Freemasonry and alchemy. In both traditions, esoteric knowledge is not openly available to everyone. It must be acquired through personal effort, direct experience, and the guidance of a master who has walked the same path. The gradual transmission of knowledge is a way of ensuring that only those who are ready can access the deeper mysteries. 1. The transmission of knowledge in Freemasonry. In Freemasonry, knowledge is transmitted in a hierarchical and symbolic manner. Masonic degrees are designed to impart gradual teachings, with each degree revealing a deeper level of wisdom. The Secret Master, having attained a high degree of understanding, is responsible for guiding Masons of lower degrees as they progress on their path. Masonic symbolism is filled with tools and symbols that require interpretation, and only an experienced master can guide the apprentice in understanding these. The transmission of hidden knowledge is done in a veiled manner, often through rituals and symbols that must be interpreted by the initiate. The use of Masonic symbolism allows the deeper teachings to be conveyed in a way that requires personal reflection and understanding, ensuring that only those spiritually prepared can access the highest mysteries. 2. Learning in alchemy. In alchemy, knowledge is also transmitted in a hidden manner. Alchemical texts are replete with symbols, metaphors and allegories that can only be understood by those who have been initiated into the mysteries. The master alchemist plays a crucial role in initiating the disciple into the mysteries of the great work. Without the guidance of a master, the initiate might get lost in the labyrinth of alchemical symbols and misinterpret the true purpose of alchemy, which is the transmutation of the soul. The transmission of knowledge in alchemy is not simply technical or intellectual, it is spiritual. Often, the master alchemist uses metaphors to guide the disciple in his understanding, allowing him to discover the secrets for himself, step by step. Alchemical symbols, such as sulfur, mercury, and salt, have multiple levels of interpretation, and it is the job of the master to help the disciple discover their deeper meanings. Both the secret master in Freemasonry and the enlightened alchemist in alchemy are central figures in the process of learning and inner transformation. Both act as guides and mentors, transmitting hidden knowledge in a gradual manner, ensuring that the disciple is ready to receive and apply this knowledge. The symbolism of apprenticeship in these traditions highlights the importance of personal effort and the spiritual preparation necessary to access the deeper truths. Ultimately, the role of the master is to guide the disciple towards enlightenment and moral and spiritual perfection, helping him to build his own inner temple and attain divine wisdom. The inner light, illumination in alchemy and Freemasonry. The inner light is a key symbol in both alchemy and Freemasonry, representing the ultimate goal of both paths, spiritual enlightenment. In these traditions, light is not simply an external or physical phenomenon, but a symbol of knowledge that dispels the darkness of ignorance and of spiritual awakening that transforms the individual from within. In alchemy, this process is associated with the alchemical fire, while in Freemasonry, it is known as the light of the master. Both concepts allude to a state of clarity and wisdom that allows the adept to attain a deeper understanding of themselves and the universe. The alchemical fire and the light of the master. 1. The alchemical fire. In alchemy, fire is a central symbol and plays a crucial role on both the physical and spiritual level. Physically, fire is the element that purifies, transforms, and elevates the raw material in the alchemical process. However, in a deeper sense, the alchemical fire is the spiritual energy that catalyzes the internal transformation of the alchemist. This fire symbolizes the life force or spiritual energy required for the transmutation of the being, an inner power that propels the alchemist on his path to perfection. Through this fire, the impurities of the soul are consumed, and the gross is refined to its purest and highest form. Just as physical fire transforms metals, alchemical fire symbolizes the ardent search for wisdom and truth, and is necessary to reach spiritual gold, which is enlightenment or the inner philosopher's stone. The alchemical fire can also be interpreted as the burning desire or spiritual longing of the alchemist to transcend material limitations and connect with the divine. In this sense, it represents the driving force that guides him on his journey through the states of purification, refinement and sublimation. 2. The Master's Light in Freemasonry. In Freemasonry, light is a key symbol representing knowledge, wisdom, and spiritual enlightenment. Upon entering the lodge, the Mason calls for light, which symbolizes the quest for hidden knowledge and spiritual clarity. Masonic degrees are conceived as a gradual process of acquiring light, in which the initiate receives teachings and symbols that guide him toward a deeper understanding of the universe and himself. The light of the Master refers specifically to the inner light that the Master Mason has attained after years of inner work and study. It is the wisdom that the Master has acquired through meditation on Masonic symbols and teachings, in which he is now ready to pass on to apprentices and fellow Masons. This light is not merely intellectual, but represents a spiritual awakening. The Master has seen beyond appearances and has penetrated the deepest mysteries of existence. Like the alchemical fire, the light of the Master is the result of a process of purification and self-perfection. The Mason who has reached this state of enlightenment becomes a guide for others, helping them to advance along the same path of self-discovery and moral perfection. spiritual enlightenment as a common goal. In both alchemy and Freemasonry, the ultimate goal is spiritual enlightenment. This enlightenment does not simply refer to the accumulation of external knowledge, but to a profound inner transformation that changes the way the individual perceives the world and relates to it. 1. Enlightenment in alchemy. Spiritual alchemy focuses on the internal transmutation of the individual, a process that culminates in enlightenment. The alchemist seeks to attain the philosopher's stone, not merely as an object of material power, but as a symbol of the perfection of the soul. Through the alchemical process, the initiate is freed from the impurities of the ego, material desires, and illusions of the world in order to attain a state of unity with the divine. Enlightenment in alchemy is a state in which the individual has achieved balance and harmonization of internal and external forces, transforming himself into a complete being aware of his spiritual nature. This state of enlightenment involves the ability to see the underlying unity in all creation and the recognition of divinity in oneself and the world around him. The enlightened alchemist has not only mastered the secrets of the transmutation of metals, but has attained a deep understanding of the mysteries of the universe and his divine purpose in it. 2. Enlightenment in Freemasonry. In Freemasonry, the search for light is a gradual process, in which the initiate, the fellow Mason and the Master Mason acquire deeper knowledge about the meaning of Masonic symbols and rituals. This light is spiritual wisdom, which guides the Mason on his path to moral perfection and self-realization. Enlightenment in Freemasonry is not only an intellectual process, but a life path in which the Mason continually works on building his inner temple. The light that the Mason seeks is ultimately a deeper understanding of himself and the universe. As he progresses through the Masonic degrees, the initiate learns to interpret the symbols more deeply, and to use this knowledge for his personal growth and inner work. True Masonic enlightenment comes when the initiate is able to apply the teachings and symbols in his daily life, transforming himself into a wiser, more just and more virtuous man. The light of the Master, therefore, symbolizes the culmination of this process, when the Mason has managed to understand the mysteries of Freemasonry in their entirety and has reached a state of balance and spiritual perfection. The inner light is the core of spiritual aspirations in both alchemy and Freemasonry. The alchemical fire and the light of the Master are symbols of the process of spiritual transformation, where the individual is purified and perfected through personal work and esoteric knowledge. Both paths aim at spiritual enlightenment, which represents the highest state of wisdom, harmony, and understanding of the world and oneself. Ultimately, the light sought on both paths is an inner light that dispels the darkness of ignorance, providing clear and deep insight into the spiritual reality underlying the entire cosmos. The use of symbolism in Masonic rites. Symbolism is an essential part of Masonic rites and plays a central role in the transmission of profound knowledge and teachings. In Freemasonry, symbols serve as tools to communicate spiritual and philosophical truths that cannot be easily expressed in words. Through rituals, these symbols allow the initiate to reflect, interpret and assimilate hidden meanings, guiding him on his path to self-knowledge and wisdom. The same is true in alchemy, where symbols are keys to accessing the mysteries of spiritual transformation. Both systems use symbols as an esoteric language that connects the individual to deeper realities. The initiation ritual and its parallels with alchemy. One of the most significant rituals in Freemasonry is the initiation rite, which marks the beginning of the neophyte's journey towards the search for light. This ritual is full of symbolism and presents several parallels with alchemy, in terms of spiritual transformation and purification. 1. The purification process. In alchemy, the initiate seeks to transform the lead of his lower nature into the gold of spiritual perfection. This alchemical process involves a series of symbolic operations that purify the individual, leading him from a state of ignorance and darkness to one of wisdom and enlightenment. Similarly, in the Masonic initiation rite, the initiate goes through a series of tests that symbolize the purification of body, mind, and spirit, helping him to leave behind the imperfections of the profane world. In both systems, the ultimate goal is the same: to attain spiritual enlightenment. The alchemist's journey through solvete coagula, dissolving and coagulating, is paralleled in the self-transformation process of the Freemason, who seeks to refine his character and perfect his being through reflection and inner work. 2. Death and symbolic rebirth. In alchemy, the concept of death and rebirth is crucial. In order for raw material to be transformed, it must first die, that is, undergo a process of dissolution or destruction so that it can be regenerated and reborn in a purer form. This cycle of death and resurrection is also present in Masonic rites, especially in the initiation rite, where the initiate experiences a symbolism of death. The death of the initiate symbolizes his separation from the profane world, while his rebirth in the lodge symbolizes the beginning of a new life dedicated to the search for truth and light. Just as the alchemist must experience a symbolic death to be spiritually reborn, the Freemason must go through the rite of initiation to leave his old self behind and be transformed into a new man, ready to begin his journey toward enlightenment. 3. The apprentice's journey. In both alchemy and Freemasonry, the path of the initiate is a gradual process that requires discipline, inner work, and constant reflection. The apprentice Mason, like the alchemist, begins his journey in a state of darkness and ignorance, but as he progresses in his training, he acquires more light and knowledge. At each degree of Freemasonry, the initiate receives symbolic teachings that bring him closer to understanding the deepest mysteries, in the same way that the alchemist must learn to decipher alchemical symbols and allegories in order to advance in his great work. The role of the alchemist in the creation of symbols in Freemasonry. The alchemist has played a key role in the creation and development of many of the symbols used in Freemasonry. Throughout history, Freemasons have incorporated alchemical concepts and symbols into their rituals, as both systems share an esoteric vision of spiritual transformation and self-knowledge. The alchemist, with its focus on internal transmutation and the perfecting of matter and spirit, brings a rich source of symbolism that resonates deeply in the Masonic context. 1. Symbols of transformation and perfection. In Freemasonry, the work of the Mason is compared to that of a builder, who must carve and polish the rough stone until it becomes a perfect cubic stone. This process is a metaphor for the work that the Mason does on himself to perfect his character and reach a state of wisdom and righteousness. This symbol has its parallel in alchemy, where the alchemist also works to transform the rough into the perfect, using the symbolism of the philosopher's stone as the ultimate goal of the great work. In fact, the philosopher's stone and the cubic stone share a deep symbolic relationship. Both represent the attainment of spiritual perfection, although from different perspectives. The philosopher's stone is the symbol of the alchemist who has succeeded in transmuting his soul, while the cubic stone is the symbol of the Mason who has achieved moral and ethical perfection through work on himself. 2. The alchemist as a symbol creator. Over the centuries, alchemists developed a complex system of symbols and allegories to convey their knowledge, since many of the alchemical teachings could not be expressed literally. These symbols, which included elements such as sulfur, mercury, and salt, as well as the four elements of nature, fire, air, water, and earth, were adopted by the Masons to represent concepts related to the dual nature of man and the process of self-improvement. In Freemasonry, these alchemical symbols are reinterpreted and used to teach moral and philosophical lessons. For example, sulfur, which in alchemy represents the active and spiritual principle, can be interpreted in Freemasonry as the inner fire that drives the Freemason to seek truth. Mercury, which symbolizes volatility and change, represents in Freemasonry the need to be in constant transformation and evolution. Through the integration of these alchemical symbols, Freemasons are able to deepen their understanding of the spiritual and philosophical teachings that guide their path. 3. The union of alchemical and Masonic symbolism. Alchemical and Masonic symbolism are intertwined in many ways, suggesting that both traditions share a common vision of the transformation of the self. Alchemical symbols, which describe processes of transmutation and purification, are used in Freemasonry to explain the process of self-perfection. Through the interaction between both traditions, the Mason is encouraged to reflect on the deeper meanings of the symbols he encounters on his path, recognizing that these do not only represent external teachings, but also point to the inner work he must do. The use of symbolism in Masonic rites is a powerful tool for the transmission of deep spiritual teachings. The Masonic initiation rite, with its tests and symbols, reflects the alchemical process of death and rebirth, in which the initiate is transformed and purified to attain the inner light. Furthermore, the alchemist, as creator and transmitter of symbols, has left an indelible mark on Freemasonry, contributing concepts that help Masons better understand their own path to perfection and enlightenment. Through symbols, both in alchemy and in Freemasonry, an esoteric language is revealed that allows initiates to penetrate the deepest mysteries of being and the universe, reminding them that external work is ultimately a reflection of internal work. The mysteries of fire and light. Fire and light are fundamental symbols in both Masonic and alchemical rituals, as they represent key elements of spiritual transformation and the quest for knowledge. Both esoteric systems use fire as a symbol of the power of purification and transmutation, while light symbolizes knowledge, illumination, and divine wisdom. Through rituals in both Freemasonry and alchemy, fire and light become symbolic tools that guide the initiate on his inner journey towards perfection and spiritual awakening. Fire in Masonic and alchemical rituals. 1. Fire in alchemy. In alchemy, fire is a central symbol of the process of transformation. It is used not only in a physical sense, such as fire heating metals and promoting chemical reactions, but also in a spiritual sense. Alchemical fire is the agent of purification, the element that breaks down raw matter to reveal its true essence, thus allowing its transmutation into something purer and higher. This process is part of the solve et coagula, where the alchemist dissolves matter into its essential components before coagulating it again into a more perfect form. On a spiritual level, the alchemical fire represents the inner power that drives the alchemist to transform his own being, burning away the impurities of the soul and allowing the divine essence within to emerge. It is the fire of spiritual desire, the drive towards self-knowledge and enlightenment. Through meditation and work with the symbolic fire, the alchemist seeks to attain the Philosopher's Stone, which is not only material perfection, but also the highest spiritual realization. 2. Fire in Masonic rituals. In Freemasonry, fire also holds an important place in rituals, albeit in a symbolic and allegorical way. Fire, especially in the form of light, is used to represent the spiritual enlightenment that the Mason seeks to acquire along his path. In many rituals, candles or torches are lit, symbolizing the quest for knowledge and wisdom that dispels the darkness of ignorance. In this context, the Masonic fire is not just a source of physical light, but a representation of the ongoing effort that the Mason must make to kindle his inner light and reach a greater understanding of himself and the world. In Masonic degrees, the use of fire is often associated with purification and rebirth. During the initiation rite, for example, the initiate goes through a symbolic process that includes trials that purify him and prepare him to receive the light. This ritual fire is associated with the purification of the Mason's character and soul, helping him to leave behind the imperfections and illusions of the outer world in order to get closer to the inner truth. 3. Parallels between alchemical fire and Masonic fire. In both alchemy and Freemasonry, fire symbolizes the spiritual energy that drives the initiate on his journey of transformation. In alchemy, fire is the catalyst that allows for the transmutation of the gross to the perfect. In Freemasonry, fire symbolizes the quest for knowledge and the power of light to illuminate the path of truth. Both systems view fire as a symbol of destruction and creation, a process of burning away the impurities of being to reveal the pure light that resides within each individual. Internal transmutation through rituals. 1. Transmutation in alchemy. The goal of alchemy is the transmutation of raw matter into something perfect and pure, like gold, but this process also has a deep spiritual meaning. True alchemy is a process of internal transformation, where the alchemist works to purify and perfect his own being. Alchemical rituals are not simply external operations on physical substances, but reflect the inner work necessary to achieve spiritual perfection. In this sense, alchemy teaches that every individual has within himself the lead of his lower nature, but through the fire of purification and meditation, he can transform that lead into spiritual gold. This process includes the purification of the ego, the refinement of the emotions, and the clarification of the mind, all of which leads to a state of enlightenment or inner Philosopher's Stone. Alchemical symbols, such as fire, the green lion, the dragon, or the phoenix, represent different aspects of the process of internal transmutation. The phoenix, in particular, is a key symbol appearing in both alchemy and Freemasonry, representing the death of the old self and the rebirth of a new spiritual being. 2. Transmutation in Freemasonry. In Freemasonry, the concept of internal transmutation is also present, especially through initiation rites and Masonic degrees. The Mason is seen as a builder, whose job is to polish the rough stone, symbol of his imperfect nature, and turn it into a perfect cubic stone. This metaphor refers to the process of self-perfection, in which the Mason works on his own character, removing impurities and developing his moral and intellectual qualities. Masonic rituals are designed to provoke deep reflection in the initiate, guiding him toward a higher consciousness. The ritual process, as in alchemy, involves the purification of the self through the symbolism of fire and light. As the Mason advances through the degrees, he acquires more light, symbolizing a deeper understanding of Masonic teachings and a closer approach to the truth. Internal transmutation in Freemasonry is not just an abstract ideal, but a continuous work that the Mason must carry out throughout his life. Through meditation on symbols and rituals, and through the study of Masonic mysteries, the initiate learns to transform himself, leaving behind his ignorance and perfecting his inner faculties to attain wisdom and virtue. 3. Transformational rituals in both traditions. In both alchemy and Freemasonry, rituals serve a transformative purpose. In alchemy, rituals symbolize the stages of the alchemical process, nigredo, albedo, rubedo, that the alchemist must go through in order to attain enlightenment. In Freemasonry, symbolic rites guide the Mason through a similar process of death and rebirth, preparing him to receive the light and advance on his path to perfection. Both systems view rituals as gateways to a deeper reality, in which symbols and ritual actions are ways of accessing the mysteries of the self and the universe. The use of fire and light in these rituals is a representation of the struggle to transcend human limitations and reach a higher state of consciousness. The mysteries of fire and light are at the core of rituals in both Freemasonry and alchemy. Fire symbolizes the power of purification and transformation, while light represents spiritual enlightenment and higher knowledge. Through rituals, initiates in both traditions undergo a process of inner transmutation, where imperfections are burned away and the true spiritual essence is revealed. Ultimately, both the alchemist and the Freemason seek to attain inner light, a state of perfection and wisdom that connects them to the deepest mysteries of being and the universe. The compass and the square as alchemical tools. In Freemasonry, the compass and square are two of the most important symbols, as they represent the balance, wisdom, and morality that every Mason must cultivate. These instruments, employed by ancient builders and architects, also have a deep spiritual and philosophical meaning, serving as constant reminders of the need to harmonize the material and the spiritual. However, when viewed from an alchemical perspective, these symbols reveal even deeper connections to the principles of inner transformation and purification. Alchemy and Freemasonry, though seemingly separate, share a similar focus on perfecting the individual through the application of universal principles and symbolic work on oneself. The compass and square, when viewed through an alchemical lens, can be seen as tools that reflect fundamental concepts of sacred geometry and the search for balance between the material world and the spiritual world. Sacred geometry and the balance between the material and spiritual world. 1. The square, with its right-angled shape, is a tool that symbolizes the material world, the structure and solidity of earthly things. In Freemasonry, it is used to remind the Mason of the need to act with rectitude and balance in his everyday interactions. However, in the context of alchemy, the square also takes on a deeper spiritual meaning. In alchemy, the process of transformation begins with raw material, which represents the imperfect and impure state of the human being. The square, symbolizing structure and precision, becomes a symbol of the discipline necessary to work on the rough stone and refine it. Similarly, the alchemist must work with precision and rigor to achieve the purification of his inner matter and reach the philosopher's stone, the state of spiritual perfection. The square reminds us that, in the alchemical process, a solid and stable foundation is essential to advance to higher stages of transformation. 2. The compass, on the other hand, the compass represents the spiritual world and the search for transcendental wisdom. In Freemasonry, the compass is used to teach the initiate to keep his passions under control and to live according to the principles of moderation and wisdom. Symbolically, the compass encompasses both the material and the spiritual, marking a limit and at the same time suggesting expansion towards infinity. In alchemy, the compass can symbolize creative power and the ability to encompass both the macrocosm, the universe, and the microcosm, the human being. This ability to move between both worlds is key to the alchemist's work, as inner transformation is a reflection of the cosmic order and vice versa. The compass, as a tool of sacred geometry, also suggests the unity between the material and the spiritual, indicating that true balance is achieved when both aspects are in harmony. This principle of unity is central to alchemy, where the alchemist seeks to unify opposites and transmute the low into the high, the imperfect into the perfect. 3. Sacred geometry. Both the compass and the square are deeply linked to sacred geometry, the science that explores the proportions and mathematical relationships that underlie the creation and order of the universe. In alchemy, sacred geometry is used to represent the harmony and balance of the cosmos, as well as the reflection of those same laws in human beings. The circle drawn with the compass and the square generated with the square are symbols of the relationship between heaven and earth, the spiritual and the material. In this sense, the compass and the square are symbols of duality and of the unification that must be achieved between these two dimensions. The alchemist, like the mason, seeks to achieve balance between his material and spiritual aspects, understanding that only through the harmonization of both can complete transformation be achieved. The use of sacred geometry in both systems is a reflection of the search for perfection and alignment with the universal laws that govern creation. Its relationship with alchemical principles. 1. Solve et coagula. One of the central principles of alchemy is the process of solve et coagula, which means to dissolve and coagulate. This principle reflects the ongoing cycle of destruction and creation, of analysis and synthesis, that is necessary for alchemical transformation. In this context, the square symbolizes coagulation, the fixing of a new, solid, stable form after the dissolution of the old. The square represents the establishment of new internal structures, once the impurities of being have been removed. The compass, on the other hand, symbolizes the process of dissolution, the opening of new possibilities and expansion into infinity. In alchemical work, it is necessary for the human being to break away from his limitations and old forms, solve, before being able to build a new reality, coagula. The compass, by tracing a circle, also represents the unity of all things, the return to the primordial state and the integration of the spiritual and the material into a harmonious whole. 2. The 3 alchemical principles. In alchemy, the 3 basic principles of sulfur, mercury, and salt represent the fundamental elements of the transformation process. Sulfur symbolizes the active principle, the will, and spiritual fire. Mercury is the passive, fluid, and volatile principle, associated with the mind and spirit, and salt is the principle of fixation and solidity, related to the body and material things. The compass and the square can be related to these alchemical principles, as they represent both the dynamic and static aspects of the transformation process. The square can be associated with salt, which symbolizes the stable and the fixed. It represents the material world that must be worked and perfected. It is the principle of structure that allows the efforts of the alchemist or the mason to be given form and solidity. The compass, with its ability to trace circles and move in a more expansive scope, can be associated with mercury, the fluid principle that allows transmutation and movement between different levels of existence. It also represents the mind in search of knowledge and wisdom. 3. The balance between the material and the spiritual. In both Freemasonry and alchemy, work on oneself involves maintaining a balance between the material and the spiritual. The compass and the square, when used together, symbolize this search for balance. The Freemason, like the alchemist, cannot limit himself to working only in the material or only in the spiritual realm. He must find harmony between the two in order to achieve perfection. This balance is also central to alchemical work, where sulfur and mercury must be balanced and united through salt to complete the process of transmutation. Alchemical work is not just a material operation, but a spiritual process in which the alchemist must transform both his body and his soul. Thus, the compass and the square become powerful symbols of this process of unification of the material and the divine. The compass and the square, as Masonic symbols, have a deep meaning in the alchemical context, where they represent tools of balance and harmonization between the material and spiritual worlds. These instruments, reflecting the principles of sacred geometry, remind us of the need to work on the internal structure of the being, while at the same time expanding our consciousness towards the divine and the infinite. In both systems, personal transformation is the ultimate goal, and the use of these symbolic tools helps the initiate to achieve spiritual perfection through the balance and integration of all dimensions of existence. Historical figures, alchemists and masons. Throughout history, some of the most prominent figures in science, philosophy, and esotericism have been connected to both alchemy and Freemasonry. These seemingly separate disciplines are intertwined through symbolism, the pursuit of occult knowledge, and the work of inner transformation. Below are some historical figures who have left a significant mark on both traditions. Isaac Newton, alchemist and mason. Isaac Newton, 1642–1727, world-renowned for his contributions to science such as the law of universal gravitation and the formulation of the laws of motion, was also an ardent practitioner of alchemy. Although there is no conclusive evidence that Newton was formally initiated into Freemasonry, his works in alchemy and his deep connection with esotericism suggest that he shared philosophical principles close to those of the Freemasons. His legacy in both fields. 1. Alchemy. During his lifetime, Newton devoted a great deal of time to the study and practice of alchemy. His alchemical writings, which remained hidden for many years, reveal his interest in the concepts of the transmutation of metals and the search for the philosopher's stone. Newton viewed alchemy not simply as a physical process, but as a spiritual discipline that would allow him to understand the deepest secrets of the universe. He wrote extensively on alchemical subjects, using symbolic language that connected with the Hermetic tradition. His interest in ancient chemistry also prompted him to conduct numerous experiments with substances in order to uncover the mysteries of matter. 2. Masonic symbolism. Although Newton was not formally recognized as a Freemason, his vision of the universe as a great clock governed by mathematical laws reflected principles that would later be adopted in Freemasonry. The Masonic concept of the grand architecture of the universe and the idea that man must understand his place within the cosmic order resonated in the work of Newton, who saw the study of natural laws as a means to understanding the divine. Elias Ashmole, the first initiated alchemist. Elias Ashmole, 1617–1692, is considered one of the first men on record to have been initiated into a Masonic lodge. As well as being a noted antiquarian, astrologer and alchemist, Ashmole left an immense legacy both in the history of alchemy and in speculative Freemasonry. 1. His Masonic initiation. On October 16, 1646, Ashmole was initiated into a Masonic lodge in Warrington, becoming one of the earliest recorded figures of speculative Freemasonry. Although Freemasonry was at that time more associated with the builders' guilds, Ashmole saw in it an opportunity to develop his philosophical and esoteric interests. In his personal diary, he recorded his initiation, noting that the symbols and rituals of Freemasonry had a profound impact on his life. 2. His influence on modern Freemasonry. As a fervent student of alchemy and the occult sciences, Ashmole incorporated many of the Hermetic principles into his vision of Freemasonry. His most lasting legacy is the library and collection of alchemical and Masonic manuscripts that he amassed during his lifetime, many of which served as references for early speculative Masonic rituals. It was through his vision and influence that Freemasonry began to take on a more philosophical and esoteric outlook, transforming into a broader order that sought spiritual transformation and transcendental knowledge. 3. Alchemy. Ashmole was a great practitioner and advocate of alchemy, writing several works on the transformation of metals and the improvement of human beings. His most famous work, Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum, 1652, is a collection of British alchemical treatises, through which Ashmole spread the principles of alchemy in his country. For him, alchemy was more than a science, it was a metaphor for the process of purification of the soul and the search for spiritual enlightenment. Other illustrious characters. 1. Cagliostro. Giuseppe Balsamo, the Count of Cagliostro, 1743–1795, was an enigmatic figure, known for his role as an alchemist, Freemason and occultist. Cagliostro founded the Egyptian rite of Freemasonry, which mixed alchemical and mystical aspects, and his charisma led him to be considered an almost legendary figure in the esoteric world. Despite the controversies surrounding his life, Cagliostro promoted the idea of spiritual regeneration through Masonic rituals and alchemical practices. His work influenced the development of several branches of more esoteric and mystical Freemasonry. 2. Paracelsus, Theophrastus von Hohenheim, Paracelsus, 1493–1541, was one of the most influential alchemists and physicians of the Renaissance. Although there is no direct evidence that Paracelsus was associated with Freemasonry, many of his alchemical principles resonated deeply with later Masonic ideas. Paracelsus promoted the idea that alchemy was not simply about transforming metals, but about healing the body and purifying the spirit. His writings on medicinal chemistry and the concept of the philosopher's stone as a metaphor for spiritual salvation inspired both alchemists and Freemasons in their quest for self-improvement and knowledge. Paracelsus revolutionized alchemy by focusing on the application of alchemical principles to medicine, making him a key figure for those who saw alchemy as a bridge between the material and the spiritual. 3. Albertus Magnus, although not directly associated with Freemasonry, Albertus Magnus, 1193–1280, was a great medieval philosopher and alchemist who profoundly influenced esoteric thought in Europe. As one of the first to conduct documented alchemical experiments, his work paved the way for many of the Masonic ideals related to the pursuit of knowledge and the harmonization between science and spirituality. The intersection between alchemy and Freemasonry is embodied in historical figures such as Isaac Newton, Elias Ashmole, Cagliostro, and Paracelsus. These figures, each in their own field, contributed to the dissemination of the philosophical, spiritual, and symbolic principles that unite both disciplines. Through their lives and legacies, we can see how alchemy and Freemasonry intertwine in their common search for personal perfection and spiritual transformation, becoming guides for those who wish to delve deeper into the hidden knowledge of the universe and of themselves. The Great Masonic Work. At the heart of Freemasonry, as in alchemy, lies the notion of personal transformation and spiritual perfection. The concept of the great work, Opus Magnum, of alchemy, which traditionally refers to the search for the philosopher's stone, finds a clear parallel in the process of Masonic initiation. Both disciplines aspire to the internal transmutation of the individual, leading him from a raw and imperfect state towards perfection and wisdom. The initiation process as an alchemical transformation. Masonic initiation is a ritualized ceremony that marks the beginning of a journey of transformation, both intellectual and spiritual. In this sense, it can be considered a symbolic form of the great alchemical work. The alchemical process involves the purification and perfection of raw material, which translates, in the Masonic context, as the purification and perfection of the individual. 1. Nigredo, darkening. In alchemy, the process of the great work begins with the phase of nigredo, or the stage of death and putrefaction. It is the moment when the alchemist recognizes the imperfection of the raw material, and through symbolic processes, dissolves it so that it can be reborn in a purer state. Similarly, in the process of Masonic initiation, the candidate goes through a rite that represents darkness, ignorance, and the need to be enlightened. In the Masonic initiation ceremony, the candidate is blinded to Masonic knowledge, symbolizing his entry into a state of darkness, from which his spiritual renewal will begin. 2. Albedo, whitening. In alchemy, after the nigredo, comes the phase of albedo, in which matter is purified. Symbolically, the Masonic initiate, after having been admitted into the light of Freemasonry, begins to work on his own being, seeking purity of soul and spirit. It is the stage in which the individual begins to understand the true nature of Masonic work, striving to shed the impurities of his character and forge a higher consciousness. 3. Rubedo, redness. Finally, the alchemist reaches the stage of rubedo, or the culmination of the great work, where the fixation of the perfect state of matter, represented by gold, occurs. In the Masonic context, this is equivalent to enlightenment or spiritual awakening, where the Mason reaches the highest level of understanding, symbolized by the title of Master Mason. This stage is the culmination of the transformation process, in which the initiate has achieved his own state of inner perfection. The parallelism between Masonic degrees and the stages of the Great Work. The Masonic degree system symbolically reflects the different stages of the Great Alchemical Work. Each degree represents a progressive level of understanding and self-transformation that the Mason must attain in order to achieve perfection. 1. Apprentice. The first degree in Freemasonry, that of apprentice, corresponds to the initial phase of the Great Work. At this level, the Mason is like the raw material of alchemy, imperfect and unrefined, but with the potential to transform. The goal of the apprentice is to begin the process of self-discovery, learning the basic principles that will govern his search for knowledge. 2. Fellowship. The second degree, that of fellowship, represents the purification and refinement phase, parallel to the albedo stage in alchemy. At this level, the Mason must deepen his understanding of the spiritual and material world, balancing both aspects of his life. It is a time of heightened awareness and wisdom, where knowledge is sought and one actively works to perfect one's character. 3. Master. The Master Mason degree is the culmination of this process, representing the phase of the albedo, in which the initiate has attained spiritual enlightenment. Here, the Mason has already understood the fundamental lessons of the fraternity and has reached the state of higher wisdom. At this point, he becomes a true master, able to guide others on their path to inner transformation. Spiritual perfection, alchemical and Masonic goal. In both alchemy and Freemasonry, the ultimate goal is spiritual perfection. The Philosopher's Stone, which in alchemy is the object of the Great Work, is a metaphor for inner illumination and perfection of being. In Freemasonry, this concept is reflected in the transformation of the rough stone into the cubic stone, symbolizing the Mason's constant work on himself to reach a state of purity and perfection. 1. Attaining wisdom through perfection of spirit. For alchemists, wisdom is not gained through the accumulation of material knowledge alone, but through inner transformation. Freemasonry takes this same approach, teaching that spiritual growth and the refinement of character are the true paths to wisdom. Masonic symbols and rituals are designed to guide the initiate on this journey, helping him overcome his passions and limitations and attain a greater understanding of himself and the universe. 2. Self-work. Both alchemists and Masons see self-work as a constant task. The Mason, like the alchemist, must sculpt his own rough stone until it is transformed into a perfect work, ready to be placed in the spiritual temple. This process is endless, since perfection is an ideal goal towards which one always moves, but which is never fully achieved on the earthly plane. The Masonic fraternity as a brotherhood of alchemists. Freemasonry, like alchemy, is not an isolated practice. Both disciplines develop within a framework of brotherhood or fraternity, where individuals support each other in their search for knowledge and truth. 1. The search for truth and universal knowledge. Both alchemists and Masons consider themselves seekers of truth. For them, truth is not a static or absolute concept, but a path of spiritual exploration. The search for knowledge does not only involve understanding the material world, but also penetrating the mysteries of the universe and human nature. Masonic rituals, like alchemical operations, are full of symbolism that helps the initiate to delve deeper into the most hidden secrets of being. 2. Brotherhood. One of the fundamental principles of Freemasonry is brotherhood. Masons, like alchemists, form a community of individuals committed to moral elevation and spiritual perfection. This brotherhood is united by a common purpose, to help its members transform their lives and achieve enlightenment. The Masonic fraternity can be seen as a brotherhood of alchemists in a symbolic sense, since, like the alchemists of old, Masons work collectively at the transformation and perfection of their souls and minds. 3. The transmission of occult knowledge. Both alchemy and Freemasonry have preserved and transmitted, over the centuries, a set of occult teachings and knowledge that are only available to those who have undergone the necessary tests to receive them. Masonic knowledge, like alchemical knowledge, is not something that can be fully understood superficially. It requires experience and initiation to be fully understood. This transmission of knowledge is one of the most important aspects of the brotherhood, as it ensures the continuity of spiritual teachings from generation to generation. The process of Masonic initiation and the symbolic work in the lodge can be seen as a form of the great alchemical work, in which the Masonic degrees reflect the different stages of personal transformation. The ultimate goal of both traditions is spiritual perfection, achieved through constant work on oneself and the search for truth. Through brotherhood, Masons, like alchemists, support each other on this journey of self-knowledge and spiritual growth, forging a brotherhood that shares the same purpose, enlightenment and understanding of the universe and human nature. Masonic alchemy in the modern world. Alchemy and Freemasonry have come a long way since their origins, but their core principles remain relevant in the modern world. Today, both alchemy and Freemasonry continue to influence those seeking a path of personal transformation and spiritual growth. In this chapter, we will explore how Masonic alchemy lives on in contemporary lodges and how its symbols and teachings can be applied to daily life in the pursuit of inner perfection. The validity of alchemy in modern Freemasonry. Although alchemy, in its literal form of metal transmutation, has largely remained in the past, its philosophical and spiritual principles continue to profoundly influence Freemasonry today. At the heart of this relationship is the idea of inner transformation, a continual process of purification and refinement that remains the primary goal of both Freemasons and alchemists. 1. Spiritual transformation. Contemporary Freemasonry adopts the alchemical principles of dissolution and coagulation, solve et coagula, but applies them in the realm of personal and spiritual development. Freemasons are encouraged to dissolve the impurities of their character, ignorance, prejudice, selfishness, and to coagulate new virtues such as wisdom, justice and brotherly love. In this way, alchemical work remains relevant as a symbol of the self-transformation that Freemasons pursue. 2. Quest for perfection. Just as alchemists sought the Philosopher's Stone to transform metals into gold, modern Masons continue their quest for spiritual perfection. This quest is a never-ending process of self-improvement and knowledge, where the Mason, through introspection and constant work on his character, transforms himself into a more refined and complete version of himself. The influence of alchemy in modern lodges. The influence of alchemy is not limited to symbolism. Many modern Masonic lodges have incorporated alchemical teachings into their rituals, studies, and discussions. This approach keeps alchemical principles accessible and relevant to contemporary Masons, who apply them on their path to enlightenment. 1. Philosophical and esoteric studies. Within Masonic lodges, alchemy is studied not only as a historical discipline, but also as a tool for meditation and self-knowledge. Masonic rituals are steeped in alchemical symbolism, from the tools used in ceremonies, such as the compass and square, to metaphors about the transmutation of the soul. Masons study alchemy as a way to deepen their understanding of the mysteries of life and spiritual development. 2. Ritual symbolism. Masonic ceremonies, with their hierarchical structure and progressive degrees, are also influenced by the principles of the alchemical great work. The initiation process, which takes the Mason from the state of apprentice to that of master, can be seen as a reflection of the alchemical journey towards enlightenment. This use of alchemical symbolism in rituals helps Masons to understand their own process of inner purification and growth. Contemporary symbolism. Modern Freemasonry has developed new symbols to reflect the realities and challenges of today's world, but these symbols remain deeply connected to alchemical principles. Sacred geometry, celestial bodies and the elements continue to play a fundamental role in contemporary Masonic symbolism, reflecting the balance between the material and the spiritual. 1. New symbols and their alchemical connections. The compass and square, for example, are Masonic tools that represent the balance between opposing forces, a key principle in alchemy. The compass, symbolizing the spiritual world, and the square, representing the material world, remind us of the alchemical principle of uniting opposites to achieve inner harmony. Other modern symbols, such as the use of light and fire in rituals, are directly related to the alchemical ideas of purification and enlightenment. 2. Internal transmutation. In contemporary Freemasonry, the concept of transmutation no longer refers to the literal transformation of metals, but to the transformation of the individual. Modern Masons work on transmuting their thoughts, emotions, and actions to align themselves with ideals of virtue and wisdom. In this sense, alchemy remains a potent metaphor for self-improvement. Masonic alchemy and personal development. One of the most valuable aspects of Masonic alchemy in the modern world is its practical application to personal development. both alchemy and Freemasonry offer a framework for self-knowledge, reflection, and continuous improvement. In everyday life, Masons apply alchemical principles to balance their lives and seek spiritual perfection. 1. Application of alchemical principles. The principle of solve et coagula, for example, can be applied to the daily life of Masons as an invitation to undo negative beliefs, habits, and patterns of behavior, and to rebuild a life based on virtue, knowledge, and service to others. Just as an alchemist works in his laboratory to purify matter, the Mason works on himself to perfect his character. 2. Character and ethics development. Freemasonry, with its strong emphasis on morality, ethics, and brotherhood, provides Masons with spiritual guidance that they can apply in their personal and professional relationships. Modern Masons, influenced by alchemy, seek to live according to the principles of justice, wisdom, and compassion. These principles not only guide them in their work within the lodge, but also in their interaction with the outside world. 3. Balance between the material and the spiritual. A central theme in both alchemy and Freemasonry is the balance between the material and spiritual worlds. Contemporary Freemasons seek to balance their material responsibilities, family, work, society, with their inner growth. This balance is seen as essential to achieving wisdom and inner peace, which is a common goal in both alchemy and Freemasonry. In the modern world, Masonic alchemy remains a source of inspiration and guidance for those seeking spiritual enlightenment and personal transformation. Although the outward forms of alchemy have changed, its fundamental principles of purification, transmutation, and perfection live on in Masonic lodges today. Contemporary symbols and rituals reflect this connection, as Masons apply alchemical principles in their daily lives to achieve greater balance, wisdom, and harmony. Thus, Masonic alchemy remains a path of growth that guides its followers towards spiritual perfection and universal knowledge. Final reflections. In this final chapter, we will recap the key ideas explored throughout the audiobook, offering a comprehensive overview of the deep bond between alchemy and Freemasonry. Through a reflective look, we will explore the quest for occult knowledge, the spiritual legacy of Masonic alchemy, and its relevance to modern spirituality, culminating in a conclusion that inspires the listener to continue their own journey of self-discovery. The search for hidden knowledge. Since their origins, both alchemy and Freemasonry have been paths of search, the search for knowledge, truth, perfection, and connection with the divine. Both systems, loaded with symbolism and mystery, invite those who study them to reveal the hidden secrets of nature and the spirit. Alchemy, with its esoteric language, its metaphors and its rituals, speaks to us of inner transformation, while Freemasonry guides us through a gradual process of self-knowledge and moral improvement. 1. Hidden knowledge in alchemy. Alchemists dedicated their lives to unlocking the secrets of matter and the soul, believing that through transmutation and purification, a higher form of wisdom could be attained. This quest was not just for physical gold, but for spiritual gold, the enlightenment of the soul. The symbols of alchemy, the philosopher's stone, the inner fire, the four elements, represent aspects of hidden knowledge waiting to be discovered by those ready for its revelation. 2. Hidden knowledge in Freemasonry. Similarly, Masonic rituals are designed to lead members along a path of progressive discovery. The process of initiation, ascension, and mastery is a metaphor for the quest for wisdom, with each degree revealing new symbols and teachings that delve deeper into the mystery of existence. For the Mason, the journey never ends, for the quest for knowledge and perfection is endless. Throughout the audiobook, we have examined the intersection between alchemy and Freemasonry, two parallel paths that, although developed in different historical and cultural contexts, share a deep symbolic and philosophical connection. 1. The path of transformation. Both alchemy and Freemasonry are deeply focused on the transformation of the self. While alchemy seeks to transform matter and ultimately the human soul, Freemasonry focuses on the construction of the inner temple, a metaphor for the spiritual and moral self-construction of the individual. In both cases, the goal is perfection, a goal which, though unattainable, provides the engine for continued development and improvement. 2. Shared symbolism. We have seen how key symbols, such as the philosopher's stone and the cubic stone, or the compasses and the square, are intertwined in the two systems. These symbols do not simply represent physical or material tools, but also guides to self-transformation and inner growth. Freemasonry adopts alchemical language as a way of expressing its own spiritual goals, such as enlightenment and the search for truth. 3. The Master as Guide. Another key connection is the figure of the Master in both disciplines. In both alchemy and Freemasonry, the Master acts as a guide who transmits hidden knowledge, helping the initiate to advance on his path to enlightenment. The enlightened alchemist and the Master Mason represent the ideals of perfection and wisdom that every initiate aspires to achieve. The legacy of Masonic alchemy is found not only in the rituals and symbols that have been passed down through the generations, but also in its lasting influence on modern spirituality. 1. Influence on contemporary spirituality. In a world that increasingly seeks meaning in the inner and spiritual, Masonic alchemy offers a path that promotes integration between the material and the spiritual. The principles of transformation and purification that both traditions teach are today applied by those seeking balance in their lives, especially in a context where material and technological distractions seem to dominate. 2. Personal development. Masonic alchemy, with its emphasis on constant improvement, remains a powerful tool for personal development. Through meditation on alchemical and Masonic symbols, individuals find ways to reflect on their lives and work on their own inner transmutation. This process of spiritual growth is as relevant today as it was in centuries past, as it addresses the universal human desire for evolution and self-understanding. Throughout this journey, we have explored the deep connections between alchemy and Freemasonry, and how these two disciplines, despite their superficial differences, share a common purpose: the search for truth and the transformation of the self. By studying their symbols, rituals, and teachings, we have seen how both paths invite us to reflect on our own journey towards perfection, both personally and spiritually. For you, who have taken this journey through Masonic alchemy, the learning does not end here. This audiobook is just the beginning of a path of personal and spiritual discovery. Both alchemy and Freemasonry offer a profound legacy that, if studied with dedication, can provide invaluable guidance to achieving a greater understanding of yourself and the world around you. We invite you to continue to delve deeper into this knowledge. Whether by further studying alchemy and its principles of transformation, or by exploring the rituals and symbols of Freemasonry, this path has much more to offer. The true work of the great work is a lifelong process, and each stage of the journey is an opportunity to discover new truths and reach higher levels of wisdom. Final words. Masonic alchemy is ultimately an invitation to continuous transformation. Each step you take on this path will bring you a little closer to understanding the mysteries of being and the universe. In this process, you will discover that true alchemy is not simply the search for the philosopher's stone or enlightenment, but the constant work of personal perfection, commitment to the search for truth, and service to humanity.